Imagine this: Albert Einstein, the man whose name would one day become synonymous with genius, spent nearly a decade of his youth unable to land a single steady teaching job. To the modern mind, this sounds absurd. How could the architect of relativity, the man who unlocked the equation energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, once be considered unemployable? Yet, this is the irony that shaped Einstein's life. His journey was not one of smooth accolades and instant recognition. Instead, it was a labyrinth of rejection letters, financial struggle, parental disappointment, and a gnawing sense that perhaps the world had no place for him. Before he stood on lecture podiums, before he toured the world as a symbol of human intellect, Einstein was simply a third-class patent clerk in Bern, Switzerland, hiding scraps of paper full of equations in his desk drawer whenever his boss walked by. This long drought of opportunity, 9 years of academic exile, was not a pause in his brilliance. Paradoxically, it was the crucible that forged his creativity. Without the suffocating routine of academia, Einstein found an unlikely sanctuary in failure. To understand how this wilderness period shaped one of the greatest scientific minds of all time, we must first return to the odd, difficult beginnings of Albert Einstein, a strange childhood and the early signs of genius. Albert Einstein did not look like a prodigy in his early years, quite the opposite. As a child, he was so slow to speak that his parents, Hermann and Pauline Einstein, feared something was wrong with him. They even consulted doctors, worried their son might never talk properly. What no one realized was that Einstein's silence was less a defect than a delay. In his own reflections, Einstein would later suggest that this late blooming forced him to process language and abstract concepts differently. Instead of parroting words, he brooded on meanings. When he did finally begin to speak, he approached ideas with a depth unusual for a child. At school, his performance was paradoxical. In subjects that interested him, such as mathematics and science, he excelled, finishing near the top of his class. But he loathed the German education system of the late 19th century, with its rigid drills, memorization exercises, and authoritarian teachers. He likened them to lieutenants in the Prussian army. The image is telling. Classrooms felt less like laboratories of curiosity and more like barracks designed to crush individuality. Einstein's distaste for authority ran deep. At 16, in an act of both rebellion and survival, he abandoned high school in Munich altogether. He left Germany behind, renouncing his citizenship and dodging compulsory military service. It was a bold move for a teenager, especially one with no clear future. His hope was to apply to a teaching college in Zurich, Switzerland, where education was more progressive and visual learning replaced rote memorization. But life, as it so often would for Einstein, threw up another wall. He failed the entrance exam. Yes, the man who would one day transform physics struggled to gain admission to college. He passed mathematics and science with ease, but stumbled disastrously in French, literature, zoology, botany, and politics. The future icon of science was told, in effect, you are not good enough. Instead of giving up, Einstein endured a humiliating detour. He spent a year at a small high school in Aarau, Switzerland. But here, in contrast to the iron discipline of German classrooms, he encountered something liberating. Teachers encourage visualization and imagination. Einstein thrived in this environment. He began to train his mind in the very way that would later define him, through thought experiments. What would happen if you rode alongside a beam of light? How would time appear to you? Such questions, sown in his teenage years, became the foundation of his revolutionary insights. By the time he retook the entrance exam, Einstein not only passed but ranked second highest in his class. He was finally admitted to Zurich Polytechnic, entering the specialized stream for mathematics and physics teachers. Einstein's admission to Zurich Polytechnic seemed like a victory, but triumph came with cracks already forming beneath the surface. His grades were respectable, though far from brilliant. On the Swiss 6-point scale, where 6 was the highest, he earned mostly 4s in mathematics. Geometry, the very language of space, proved especially troublesome for him. In physics, he fared better, earning 5s and 6s, except for one humiliating mark, a 1 in his third-year beginner's physics lab. The professor responsible, Jean Pernet, had little patience for Einstein's irreverence. On the rare occasions when Einstein appeared in class, he ignored instructions altogether. When handed a sheet of written directions, he tossed it into the trash and insisted on doing the experiment his own way. His rebellious spirit, which would one day revolutionize physics, at this stage only branded him a troublemaker. At first, he found a sympathetic figure in another professor, Heinrich Weber, but Einstein's respect curdled into contempt when Weber stubbornly refused to teach contemporary material, particularly James Clerk Maxwell's groundbreaking theories of electromagnetism. To Einstein, this was the cutting edge of physics, the frontier that mattered most. To Weber, it was an irrelevance. Einstein's impatience grew into open disdain, and Weber's feelings soon soured in return. These clashes proved costly. When graduation approached, the university's best students typically received positions as teaching assistants, a vital first step into academia. But Weber loathed Einstein so deeply that he refused to consider him. In a shocking move, he chose to hire 2 students from the engineering division instead of the physics graduate, whose name would one day echo across history. Thus, in 1900, Einstein became the only member of his cohort to graduate without a single job offer. While his classmates stepped into respectable academic roles, Einstein found himself staring into the void. He was 21 years old, a newly minted graduate with no prospects, no income, and growing resentment from professors who seemed determined to block his path. This was the first taste of the long exile to come. 9 years of rejection, insecurity, and obscurity. In hindsight, Einstein's troubles were not entirely a matter of bad luck. He had, after all, contributed to his own downfall. His arrogance, though born of genuine insight, left scars. Professors do not easily forget the student who dismisses their lectures as outdated or who mocks the very framework of their teaching. Weber, in particular, became Einstein's shadow nemesis. Rumors swirled that he gave poor references for Einstein whenever prospective employers inquired. Whether out of wounded pride or genuine doubt about his students' abilities, Weber's word carried weight. In the tight-knit world of European physics at the dawn of the 20th century, one hostile reference could close many doors. Yet Einstein was not merely a victim of personal vendetta. His own temperament worked against him. He distrusted authority, resisted conformity, and refused to polish his image. Unlike many ambitious young scholars, he never cultivated powerful patrons, never curried favor with professors, never bothered to disguise his disdain. It was authenticity at its purest, but also professional suicide. Amidst this wilderness of rejection, Einstein found solace in an unlikely partner, Mileva Maric. She was the only woman in the mathematics and physics program at Zurich Polytechnic, a Serbian student with sharp intellect, a limp from a birth injury, and by conventional standards of the time, plain looks. Yet Einstein was captivated not by appearances, but by her mind. Their relationship was not the stuff of romantic novels. It was forged in study halls, long walks filled with scientific debate, and shared notebooks scribbled with equations. Mileva double-checked the mathematics of Einstein's theories, served as his sounding board, and gave him the confidence he lacked in a hostile academic environment. Einstein confessed his dependence on her in a letter. "Without you, I lack self-confidence. Pleasure in my work, pleasure in life. In short, without you, so I will leave that you. My life is not life." This was no casual affection. Einstein leaned on Mileva as both intellectual partner and emotional anchor. But love rarely exists in a vacuum. His parents, especially his mother Pauline, vehemently opposed the relationship. When Albert confided his intention to marry Mileva, Pauline reacted with a storm of despair. She threw herself onto her bed, buried her face in the pillow, and sobbed like a child. To her, Mileva was not suitable. Not in appearance, not in health, not in social standing. Then came the complication that would haunt them both. Mileva became pregnant. In January 1902, in her parents' home in Novi Sad, Serbia, she gave birth to a daughter, Liesel. Einstein never laid eyes on her. To this day, the fate of Liesel remains a mystery. Some accounts suggest she may have been adopted by Mileva's friend. Others believe she died of scarlet fever before the age of 2. Einstein and Mileva destroyed most of their letters mentioning her, erasing her almost completely from history. For a young man already drowning in professional rejection, This secret child was an anchor pulling him deeper into despair. Einstein promised Mileva he would marry her as soon as he secured stable employment, but stable employment was precisely the one thing he could not find. Desperation breeds humility, and Einstein's letters during these years reveal a man oscillating between stubborn humor and crushing hopelessness. To a friend he quipped, "God created the donkey and gave him a thick skin. I will leave no stone unturned and do not give up my sense of humor." But behind the bravado was real despair. He wrote to Wilhelm Ostwald, a renowned professor in Leipzig, asking if there was any position available. Silence. He wrote again, apologizing in case he had forgotten to include his address in the first letter. More silence. Finally, his father Hermann stepped in with a plea so raw it borders on heartbreaking. "My son Albert is 22 years old. He passed his diploma examinations in mathematics and physics with flying colors last summer. He feels profoundly unhappy with his present lack of position. Each day he becomes more entrenched in the idea that his career has gone off track. Since it is you, highly honored professor, whom he admires most, I beg you, write to him a few words of encouragement. If, in addition, you could secure him an assistant's position, my gratitude would know no bounds." It was the letter of a desperate father, begging strangers to save his son's future. But once again, there was no reply. Einstein concluded that Weber, his old nemesis, must have poisoned his chances with bad references. He also suspected that anti-Semitism played a role. The early 20th century was rife with prejudice, and Einstein's Jewish heritage marked him as an outsider. Whatever the reasons, the result was undeniable. Door after door slammed in his face. He took on occasional tutoring jobs, but they were scarce and barely covered expenses. With a secret daughter to support, marriage plans stalled, and his family disapproving of Mileva, Einstein's life began to look like an endless spiral downward. At this point, any ordinary young man might have abandoned science altogether. But Einstein was no ordinary man. What the world dismissed as a failure was, in truth, the incubation of greatness. The waiting years, though bitter, would soon become the soil in which revolutionary ideas took root. By 1902, Einstein's prospects seemed hopeless. He had graduated with promise, but no professor would hire him. His father had pleaded in vain, and private tutoring could not sustain a stable life. For most, this would have been the end of the dream. For Einstein, it was the beginning of something unexpected. A lifeline came through Marcel Grossmann, his loyal classmate. Grossmann's father was acquainted with the director of the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. Through this connection, Einstein secured a modest job as a technical expert, third class, essentially an examiner of patent applications. It was far from the grandeur of academia. To many, it looked like a humiliating come-down. The son of Hermann Einstein, the boy once imagined as a future professor, was reduced to evaluating other men's inventions. But what seemed like a defeat became his unlikely sanctuary. The patent office demanded rigor, but not drudgery. Einstein's boss had one guiding principle: question everything. Einstein applied that principle not only to the gadgets crossing his desk, but also to the very laws of nature. Most importantly, the workload was light. Einstein discovered that he could complete a full day's assignments in just 2 or 3 hours. The remaining time of his 8-hour shift, 6 days a week, became his hidden laboratory. Whenever footsteps approached, he would shove his notes into the drawer and pretend to be working on patent files. In reality, he was dissecting the universe. He later described the office as his worldly cloister, a place where, cloaked in anonymity, he hatched his most beautiful ideas. Ironically, had Einstein been absorbed into the routine of academia, bound by professors' expectations and departmental duties, he might never have had the creative freedom to think so radically. The very rejection that had haunted him became the soil for genius. Yet fate was cruel. In October 1902, just as Einstein found some stability, his father died. Hermann Einstein passed away, believing his son had become nothing more than a third-class patent clerk. He never lived to see the miraculous transformation that was only a few years away. The year 1905 would forever be etched into the history of science as Einstein's Annus Mirabilis, the miracle year. In the space of 12 months, while still a lowly patent clerk, he published 4 papers that transformed physics. The first, in March, attacked one of the great mysteries of light. Scientists knew light behaved like a wave, Yet experiments showed it could also knock electrons off atoms and generate electric current. Einstein proposed something revolutionary, that light was not just a wave, but also a stream of discrete particles. Quanta, later called photons. This insight explained the photoelectric effect and eventually won him the Nobel Prize. In April, he published his second paper. It offered a novel way to measure molecules and indirectly prove the existence of atoms, something still debated at the time. The work was meticulous, cautious, even conservative, because it formed part of his PhD thesis. Yet its implications were enormous. It settled a century-old argument by providing hard evidence that atoms were real. In May, his third paper tackled a puzzle left unsolved for nearly 80 years. The Scottish botanist Robert Brown had observed pollen grains in water jittering endlessly under a microscope. No one could explain it. Einstein reasoned that the random motion came from invisible collisions with atoms and molecules of water. By mathematically modeling this Brownian motion, he gave scientists a window into the microscopic world. But it was the fourth paper, published in June, that shattered our conception of reality. In it, Einstein introduced the special theory of relativity. The heart of the theory was simple, yet staggering. Time and space are not absolute. They bend and shift depending on one's frame of reference. Einstein illustrated it with a thought experiment involving a train and a platform. Imagine lightning strikes both ends of a moving train. To an observer on the platform standing midway, the strikes seem simultaneous. But to a passenger inside the train, moving toward one strike and away from the other, the flashes arrive at different times. Simultaneity itself, Einstein revealed, is relative. This was radical. Newton's universe had endured for centuries as a realm of absolute time and space. Einstein replaced it with a universe where clocks tick differently depending on how fast you move. It was as if the ground beneath reality had cracked open. Exhausted from writing this paper, Einstein collapsed into bed for 2 weeks while Mileva helped check the mathematics. Yet he was not finished. In September, he added a fifth paper, a postscript that contained one of the most famous equations in history. Energy equals mass times the speed of light squared. Energy and mass, he declared, are interchangeable. A small amount of mass could unleash a vast ocean of energy. Einstein was still working at the patent office when these papers appeared in Annalen der Physik, one of Europe's leading journals. His name was there in black and white, yet the world did not rush to crown him. He remained anonymous, still unrecognized, still filing patent applications by day. But history had changed forever. The patent clerk had become the architect of modern physics. 9 years of waiting, the silent struggle. One might imagine that after the miracle year of 1905, Einstein would be flooded with offers, his phone ringing off the hook, universities scrambling to hire the patent clerk who had just rewritten the laws of the cosmos. But reality was far harsher. There was no applause, no invitations, no professorships. His revolutionary papers were met with icy silence from much of the academic establishment. It was not that they were ignored entirely. Specialists in physics slowly began to recognize their brilliance, but institutions moved with glacial slowness, and Einstein had no network of powerful mentors to advocate for him. His sister recalled how bitterly disappointed he was. Here was a man who had explained the photoelectric effect, revived atomism, solved Brownian motion, and demolished Newton's absolutes, all before his 30th birthday, and yet he was still merely Herr Einstein, third-class patent clerk. The personal cost was heavy. His father was already gone, never seeing the genius his son would become. His mother remained skeptical, and his marriage to Mileva was strained. They had 2 sons by this point, but Mileva's own scientific dreams had crumbled after repeated exam failures. She watched with a mixture of pride and resentment as her husband soared intellectually while she tended the household in poverty. Einstein, meanwhile, found refuge in music. He was an accomplished violinist, particularly fond of Mozart. When despair threatened to overwhelm him, he would retreat into melody. His son Hans Albert later recalled, "Whenever he felt he had come to the end of the road, he took refuge in music, and that solved all his difficulties." Still, reality pressed hard. He was so desperate for a teaching position that he applied for a job as a high school mathematics teacher in Zurich, but failed to make the final shortlist. Eventually, he secured a part-time junior lectureship at the University of Bern, teaching a handful of students late in the evening. The pay was so meager that he could not afford to quit his patent office job. Thus, year after year passed. From 1900 until 1909, 9 long years, Einstein carried the label of failure. To the outside world, he was just another obscure clerk, scraping by. But beneath that ordinary exterior, the greatest transformation in physics since Newton was quietly taking root. Finally, in 1909, the tide turned. The man who had once been ignored by professors now had one powerful supporter, Alfred Kleiner, a respected professor of physics at the University of Zurich. Kleiner had helped Einstein obtain his PhD earlier and recognized the brilliance others had overlooked. That year, Kleiner offered Einstein an associate professorship. It was not a grand position by global standards, but for Einstein, it was liberation. He could finally leave behind the patent office, where he had hidden equations in drawers, and lived a double life as bureaucrat by day, visionary by night. The appointment was more than a job. It was validation. After years of silence and humiliation, the academic world had finally opened a door. The young man, once denied assistantships, once shunned by Weber, once rejected by every institution he approached, was now stepping into the role he had dreamed of. From here, the trajectory accelerated. Zurich led to Prague, then back to Zurich, and eventually to Berlin, the very heart of theoretical physics in Europe. Einstein, who had once despised German schools and their rigidity, now returned to Germany as a conquering intellectual hero. Yet this turning point did not erase the scars of the past. Those 9 years of exile had shaped him permanently. He knew what it was to be dismissed, to be overlooked, to feel like the world had no use for him. That memory kept him humble, even when fame later followed. For Einstein, the long drought ended in 1909, but the years of waiting had already done their work. They had made him patient, resilient, and fiercely independent. Without them, the Einstein the world came to worship might never have existed. A fractured marriage and Elsa's shadow. Einstein's professional star was rising, but his personal life was unraveling. The same man who could untangle the mysteries of the cosmos could not untangle his marriage. Mileva Maric, once his confidant and collaborator, felt increasingly marginalized. Her own dreams of an academic career had collapsed when she repeatedly failed her final exams. Meanwhile, Einstein was traveling, publishing, and basking in the slow but undeniable recognition of his work. Their partnership had begun as equals, 2 young students challenging the boundaries of physics together. But in marriage, it became painfully unequal. Mileva bore the responsibilities of raising 2 sons, Hans Albert and Eduard, while Einstein immersed himself in calculations and correspondence. She resented that she had abandoned her scientific ambitions only to serve as caretaker for a genius who seemed consumed by his work. Into this fragile space stepped another woman, Elsa, Einstein's cousin. Elsa was everything Mileva was not: nurturing, domestically inclined, unconcerned with equations or academic arguments. Einstein, weary of Mileva's bitterness and attracted to Elsa's warmth, drifted into an affair. The tension culminated in one of the most unusual divorce bargains in history. Einstein wanted freedom to marry Elsa, but Mileva resisted. To persuade her, Einstein offered a remarkable deal. If he ever won the Nobel Prize, he would give her the prize money. Mileva thought for a week, then agreed. The contract, strange as it was, revealed the cold pragmatism creeping into their relationship. Mileva would wait nearly 2 decades to collect. Einstein did not receive the Nobel until 1921, and ironically, not for relativity, but for his explanation of the photoelectric effect. By then, she was long separated from him, her life marked by disappointment and depression. For Einstein, personal sacrifice seemed almost inevitable. He had become a man divided, husband and father on one side, visionary scientist on the other. It was the second identity that consumed him. Even as his marriage disintegrated, Einstein's scientific imagination reached new heights. He realized that special relativity, published in 1905, had left an enormous gap. It explained motion at constant speeds, but ignored gravity and acceleration. Newton's law of gravitation still ruled supreme, and Einstein could not accept that his elegant theory stopped short of the most universal force in the cosmos. Then in 1907, while sitting at his desk in the patent office, Inspiration struck like lightning. He recalled it later as the happiest thought of my life. If a man were to fall freely, Einstein reasoned, he would not feel his own weight. From this simple idea, he imagined the famous elevator thought experiment. If someone were inside an elevator in free fall, they would feel weightless, just like astronauts floating in orbit. Conversely, if the elevator were accelerating upward, the person inside would feel heavier, as if gravity itself had grown stronger. From the inside, one could not tell the difference between acceleration and gravity. This realization became the foundation of the equivalence principle. Acceleration and gravitation are indistinguishable. Gravity was no longer a mysterious force pulling objects from a distance, as Newton had claimed, but something far stranger, a distortion of space and time itself. Einstein spent nearly a decade developing this insight, battling equations and geometry until he finally unveiled the general theory of relativity in 1915. It predicted astonishing things: that massive objects bend space-time around them, that planets orbit not because they are tugged by invisible strings, but because they follow curved paths in warped geometry, that even light itself should bend when passing near a star. For years, these predictions remained untested, but in 1919, during a solar eclipse, astronomers confirmed that starlight did indeed shift position when passing near the sun, exactly as Einstein's equations foretold. The confirmation made headlines around the world. Newspapers declared, "Revolution in science, new theory of the universe." Einstein, the once jobless patent clerk, became a global celebrity overnight. He was feted not only as a scientist, but as a symbol of human brilliance, his wild white hair and violin as much a part of his image as his equations. Crowds flocked to see him, to hear him, to touch the man who had bent time itself. For Einstein, the happiest thought of his life had rewritten the universe, and it had also rewritten his destiny. By the early 1920s, Albert Einstein had become more than a physicist. He was a cultural phenomenon. His face, with its untamed white hair and thoughtful gaze, was instantly recognizable. Crowds followed him in the streets of Berlin and New York. When he toured the United States, journalists swarmed, eager to capture his every word. He was portrayed not just as a scientist, but as a sage, a prophet of the modern age. Einstein used this fame to speak out. He denounced racism in America, calling it a disease of white people. He opposed militarism and nationalism, urging humanity to rise above tribal divisions. He supported the cause of a Jewish homeland in Palestine as anti-Semitism surged across Europe after the First World War. To many, he seemed like a man of rare moral clarity. But like all humans, Einstein was riddled with contradictions. His private diaries, revealed decades later, contained remarks about the Chinese that today read as disturbingly xenophobic. He criticized them as industrious, filthy, obtuse people, and wrote that it would be dreary if they supplanted other races. The same man who publicly condemned prejudice had in private voiced it himself. Even in politics, his stance wavered. Though he preached pacifism, he also proposed that a world federation should maintain an armed force to prevent wars. While decrying nationalism, he championed a Jewish state as refuge for his people. These inconsistencies did not erase his achievements, but they revealed a complex truth. Albert Einstein, the genius, was not above the flaws of ordinary men. He was human, brilliant, idealistic, fallible, and sometimes hypocritical. And as the world darkened again in the 1930s, the contradictions of his life would become more pronounced. When the Nazis came to power in Germany, Einstein's situation became perilous. His summer cottage in Brandenburg was raided, his books and belongings confiscated. He vowed never to return. In 1933, he emigrated to the United States, settling at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. But America did not greet him with unqualified warmth. Suspicious of his political associations, the Federal Bureau of Investigation compiled over 1,400 pages of files on him. To some, he was still a dangerous radical, a foreign intellectual with leftist sympathies. Einstein, once dismissed as unemployable, was now feared as too influential. As Hitler's Germany surged toward war, Einstein grew alarmed. not only at the rise of fascism, but at the terrifying prospect that German scientists might develop an atomic bomb. Though he had never been directly involved in weapons research, he understood the implications of his own famous equation. If energy equals mass times the speed of light squared, showed that mass could unleash unimaginable energy, what would happen if that principle were harnessed for destruction? In 1939, Einstein co-signed a letter to President Franklin Roosevelt warning that Germany might build such a weapon. This letter, though cautious in tone, helped spark what would become the Manhattan Project, the United States race to develop the atomic bomb. Ironically, Einstein himself was never invited to participate. American officials distrusted him, fearing his political views, and kept him at arm's length. Still, the connection between his equation and the bomb remained indelible. When Hiroshima was annihilated in August 1945, Einstein's reaction was painfully brief. "Oh my God." Behind those 3 words was a lifetime of conflicting emotions. He had sounded the alarm, yes, but he had not built the weapon. His work had laid the theoretical foundation, but he had always envisioned science as a force for enlightenment, not annihilation. For the rest of his life, Einstein carried the burden of that association. He spoke against nuclear proliferation, warning of humanity's capacity for self-destruction. He supported the creation of international institutions to restrain nations from rushing into war. Yet he could not escape the knowledge that his most famous formula had been branded in history as the cornerstone of the bomb. It was a cruel paradox. The man who dreamed of unifying the laws of the universe, who once called his insight about free fall the happiest thought of my life, was now haunted by a darker thought, that human beings might use science not to liberate themselves, but to obliterate one another. After the war, Einstein settled permanently at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. It was an elite refuge for thinkers, free from the obligations of teaching or grading papers. Here, he could dedicate himself entirely to what he considered the unfinished business of his life, finding a unified theory of everything. General relativity had explained gravity as the curvature of space-time. Quantum mechanics had revealed the bizarre probabilistic world of atoms and subatomic particles. But the 2 theories were incompatible, their visions of reality fundamentally at odds. Einstein believed there had to be a deeper, more elegant framework that united them. Day after day, he scribbled equations, chasing this dream. He refused to accept the randomness of quantum physics, once famously declaring, "God does not play dice with the universe." To Einstein, the idea that reality was governed by chance was intolerable. Nature, he believed, was orderly at its core. One phenomenon particularly troubled him: quantum entanglement. When 2 particles become linked, they seem to influence each other instantaneously, no matter how far apart they are. To Einstein, this was spooky action at a distance, something that defied logic. He hoped a unified theory would explain such mysteries without resorting to probabilities. Colleagues admired his persistence, but quietly doubted his direction. Physics was moving forward into quantum theory, particle accelerators, and new mathematics, while Einstein seemed increasingly isolated, pursuing a lonely vision. Yet he pressed on, convinced that even a slim chance of success was worth the struggle. In the final weeks of his life, Einstein's hospital room resembled less a place of rest than a study. Beside his bed lay 12 pages of equations, unfinished fragments of his final attempt at a unified theory. When a colleague asked him why he would embark on such a daunting quest with so little time left, Einstein replied simply, "It is worth it, however small the chance." Even as his body failed, his mind would not relent. To the very end, he sought to decode the hidden architecture of the cosmos. On April 18, 1955, Albert Einstein died of an abdominal aneurysm at the age of 76. A nurse who attended him recalled his final words, spoken in German, words she could not understand. The great voice of modern science fell silent, leaving behind pages of unfinished calculations and a universe still waiting for its ultimate explanation. His death did not mark the end of his influence. If anything, Einstein's legend only grew. His theories reshaped technology, from GPS satellites to nuclear energy. His face became a global icon, adorning posters, mugs, and t-shirts. His name itself, Einstein, entered the language as a synonym for genius. Yet it is crucial to remember the paradox of his life. For 9 years after graduation, Albert Einstein was, in society's eyes, a failure. He was the student no professor would hire, the man whose father wrote begging letters on his behalf, the tutor scrambling for odd jobs, the third-class patent clerk hiding physics notes in a desk drawer. And yet, those 9 years were not wasted. They were formative. They gave Einstein freedom from academic dogma, time to think in solitude, and the humility to endure rejection. Without those years of exile, the miracle year of 1905 might never have happened. Einstein himself embodied the lesson. Genius is not always recognized immediately, nor is success guaranteed by credentials. Sometimes the world slams every door, and yet in the silence behind them, the greatest ideas are born. His legacy is not merely the theories of relativity or the equation E=mc2. It is the reminder that perseverance matters as much as brilliance, that rejection can be fertile ground, and that even the world's most famous genius once wandered unemployed, dismissed, and nearly forgotten. Einstein's life teaches us that failure is not the opposite of success. It is often its raw material. And from the ashes of those 9 jobless years rose a man who changed our understanding of time, space, and reality, space and reality itself.